Upheaval, Breaking Point, Chapter 19, Standing Together. "Let's hurry back," Vanguard said. "They should be awake and hungry by now. Do you have enough for them, Scarlet?"
"Sure thing, Captain," Scarlet Rabbit replied. "I even brought some for the dragon. I don't know if his kind likes bread and moss, though." "Vanguard clash!"
The two of them looked up at where the angry voice came from. Before Vanguard could get a good look, something heavy crashed on him, knocking him on his belly with his legs spread apart. His breath blew out of his lungs at the impact. He recognized the feel of 4 hooves stepping on him. From the voice and the entrance, he guessed with a sinking heart as to who it was.
"Good morning, Flight Captain Tailwind,"
Scarlet said.
"Good morning to you too, Scarlet Rabbit," Tailwind answered. "Move along now, I have some talking to do with my stupid son."
Vanguard looked up at Scarlet Rabbit and nodded. In a blink, the Pegasus flew ahead. With Scarlet gone, he focused his attention on his mother. Before he could say anything, he felt her lift him up by the shoulders, then bang his snout against the pavement. The impact did no damage, but he did feel his head ring.
"You came back from the dead days ago, and you can't even be bothered to tell me?"
"I was assigned a mission as soon as I—" Vanguard's snout hit the pavement again.
"You owe me 12 dead wolven, you rotten colt. I went on a rampage because I thought you were dead. Your father nearly got himself killed."
Vanguard was still rubbing his snout as he walked towards the building where Twilight and the others were staying. Tailwind had decided to accompany him after finding out that 2 of the Chosen were Pegasi. They were still a good distance from the building when he spotted the Chosen. They were near the end of a line of ponies while Scarlet hovered nearby. He looked towards the other end of the line to find that Logistics had set up a recruiting station. A call to arms must have already been issued across Bastion City, and citizens were lining up to join Equestria's defense. The long line would normally have been a bother to Twilight Sparkle. This time she was glad for it. Being made to stand in line showed that there would be no more being separated from the rest of the Legion because she was Princess Celestia's student. Now she could really show that she meant what she said about standing together with Equestria's defenders. As the line moved on, she noticed a familiar black-barded figure walking towards her. It was easy to spot Vanguard Clash. There was no pony else who had his armor or that enormous weapon he kept strapped to his back. He was walking with some ponies this time, a Pegasus mare who was about an inch shorter than he was, with a light blue, almost white coat. Her mane was grey, like the underside of a storm cloud, cut short and swept to one side. A long thin scar ran along her right side of her jaw. Like Scarlet Rabbit, she wore a coat of chain reinforced with metal plates around her chest, flanks and neck. Unlike Scarlet's grey plates, however, this pony's barding carried a distinct silvery sheen. She also wore no champron. A stylized wing was embossed in gold on the left part of her chest plate.
"You took your time,"
Twilight said to Vanguard. Vanguard glanced briefly to the Pegasus next to him as an answer. "Every pony. This is Flight Captain Tailwind. Flight Captain, these are the Chosen I was talking to you about." Tailwind approached Twilight's group, carefully inspecting them with bright blue eyes. She was immediately drawn to Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy.
"I never imagined that I would actually meet Celestia's Chosen in my lifetime," she said. "I hear that you plan to join the Legion. That's commendable."
She stopped and gave Rainbow Dash a good hard look.
"Is this one the one you mentioned?"
Vanguard nodded. Tailwind stretched out one of Rainbow's wings with her hoofs.
"Looks promising," she said. "Is she fast?"
"Almost as fast as Scarlet," Vanguard answered. Tailwind nodded approvingly. Rainbow was about to raise her head proudly, but she stopped midway. Her eyes widened, then her gaze immediately landed on Scarlet Rabbit, who was still hovering nearby. The sight of this put a small smile on Tailwind's lips. She looked towards Fluttershy.
"And what about this one?"
she asked. Vanguard shook his head. Redbrand has that one packed for medical already.
That foal of a nag, Tailwind muttered. When did he get to reserve recruits for himself? Fine.
She looked at Rainbow, who was taken a little aback by the intense stare.
I'll see you in reconnaissance. Now I have to go. The other flight captains will have started arguing over recruit placement. I don't intend on finishing this day with less than a full flight.
With that, Tailwind walked off. She patted Vanguard on the shoulder as she passed him.
Stay safe, son,
she said. I might not survive the next time I hear you're dead.
She seems interesting, Twilight said once Tailwind had left.
I heard her call you son, Applejack said. Was that your ma? Yes, Vanguard answered. His lips twisted a little. She wasn't very happy that I put off seeing her until we got here, but she was more reasonable about it than I expected. She sounds like a nice lady, Applejack said with a grin. Vanguard snorted. Try telling that to her flight. Move along, the line's adjusting. The line eventually dwindled until it was their turn to face the recruiting officer. The olive-coated stallion took a sip from the cup of tea on his table. At the sight of Twilight's group, he nearly gagged.
What's this?
He spluttered.
When did we start drafting Chosen?
They're recruits, Vanguard said. Ignore the marks on their flanks. They'll serve just like every pony else. The recruiting officer glanced skeptically at Vanguard, then shrugged. He offered the quill to Twilight and pointed to a piece of parchment on the table.
Names and signatures here, he said.
He stared intently at Twilight when she held the quill.
By signing on, you hereby pledge your complete loyalty to the Equestrian Legion, that you will obey its officers and acknowledge their authority as extensions of the authority of Prince Terrado, rightful ruler of the Barrier Lands. Know that there is no leaving the Legion. Even after retirement from active duty, you will be expected to serve if called upon. If you attempt to leave once you have joined, you will be tried for treason. Do you understand?
The words only served to highlight the finality of the path Twilight had chosen. Her eyes narrowed and she kept her grip on the quill steady. It was only after she had signed her name on the parchment did she realize that her heart was pounding. She stepped back to steady herself while her friends followed suit.
Unicorns to magical, Pegasi to reconnaissance, Earth ponies to infantry, the officer said. Check in with your respective officers behind me once you're done here.
Before he could continue, his gaze fell on Rainbow Dash, whereupon his eyes widened. He checked his cup and shook it a little, sloshing the liquid around.
Terrado's torn wing, what's in this tea?
Excuse me?
Fluttershy said after signing her name. The recruiting officer raised an eyebrow.
What's the matter, Philly? He asked. You've barely got a hoof past the door and you've got something to complain about already?
Oh, no,
Fluttershy replied.
I wouldn't do that. It's just that Dr. Redbrand said if you put me in reconnaissance instead of medical, he would saw your muzzle off. That sounds pretty painful.
What?
The recruiting officer asked.
But I just sent him a squad's worth of recruits. What did you do to catch his eye? Show him a little flank?
Fluttershy paused and looked at her flank.
Well, he did notice my cutie mark.
The recruiting officer put a hoof to his face.
That stallion's old enough to be your father. All right, I'll have you go to medical instead. Let Redbrand duke it out with the wing commander.
With that out of the way, they all proceeded to the crowded area behind the recruiting officer. Recruitment was taking place on an enormous plaza at the center of the city, a parading ground now converted for training. It was there that they had to separate. Twilight and Rarity quickly noticed that Magical was the smallest group in the plaza, consisting of a small cluster of unicorns. It also occurred to them that they had barely seen any unicorns in the city. They were given mage coats, thick layers of cloth padded with leather inside to help against enemy fangs, claws and bolts. Although it horrified them to find out that the leather was taken from actual animal hide instead of being magically synthesized like back in the Heartland, they stayed silent about it. Once they had put their coats on, they were ordered to line up, 3 rows with 7 ponies each, tallest to shortest from left to right, and each pony a leg's length from each other. When the unicorns, most of who were as old as or even younger than Twilight, took some time to get into the required position, the unicorn officer shouted at them. "What's the matter with you drillheads? We haven't even gotten to spellcasting yet and you're already fumbling about. 3 rows, 7 ponies. Move, move, move!" All the unicorn recruits scrambled, comparing heights and stretching out legs to make sure they were properly spaced. The unicorn officer walked out in front of them. He was a strange sight for a pony, a greyish-white unicorn with a completely shaved mane. His tail was nothing more than a tuft of green hair, just a few inches long. Like them, he wore a thick, leather-padded coat. Unlike them, his was trimmed with gold thread, and a stylized horn marked the left side of his chest. 21 unicorns, he said. "We are faced with the greatest wolven attack in centuries, and my beloved Bastion City comes up with 21 unicorns. 19, seeing as 2 of you are chosen." Twilight and Rarity winced when they felt the eyes of their fellow recruits go towards them. "Eyes forward, you sacks of manure!" the officer shouted. "No pony told you to ogle them. Don't make me be the first one to send recruits to the whipping post." Every unicorn in the group flinched and looked straight ahead. "Now let's get down to business. I am Mage Captain Owlside. Not that it would matter to you drillheads, as I will kick your flanks if you address me as anything but sir. Before we do anything, we will test you for 2 things, magical sustaining and magical burst. These 2 traits will help us determine if you belong to the Spellfire line or with the arcane shields. Bring out the target dummies, Vice Captain." A unicorn behind the group trotted forward, carrying several dummies made from 2 intersecting poles and a sack stuffed with straw. He went to the patch of earth by one side of the plaza and stood them up before going back to his place. "First, we'll test you for magical burst," Owlside continued. "Each of you will step forward and cast, preferably, an attack spell you know. If you don't know any, a telekinetic kick will suffice. Now let's get started." The first recruit stepped forward and cast his spell. His horn glowed a steady green as he projected a blob of telekinesis that hurtled towards the dummy. The spell struck, causing the wood to shake as if it had been kicked hard. Seeing the results, he smiled before returning to his place. Mage Captain Owlside looked on, nodded, then scribbled on a notebook he carried. Several recruits followed, most using the same telekinetic blow to give the dummy a good shake with each hit. One recruit managed to snap the dummy's support. He grinned at this and was about to rear triumphantly when a glare from Owlside sent him slinking back to his post. "Not bad," Owlside said. "It's your turn, Purple Chosen. Show us what you've got." Twilight Sparkle swallowed a large lump in her throat as she stepped up. She wanted to cast a telekinetic kick just like every pony had, but she remembered that Mage Captain Owlside preferred an offensive spell she knew. She thought back to Pyre Valor's notes. She had studied them a good deal, and she was confident that she had learned one, Burning Hooves. She stood about 10 feet away from the dummy and made sure she faced away from any pony before beginning the spell. She had never worked with fire before, beyond lighting candles anyway. It wasn't just because there had never been a situation that she could only solve with a generous dose of burning. Fire was a difficult element to control. It harmed others far too easily and spread quickly at the slightest mistake. Now she was going to have to try it. She could feel the tips of her hoofs grow hot as she gathered the magic. As soon as she felt that heat, she felt the urge to immediately regulate the energy to make sure that it didn't hurt anyone. She squashed that urge, however. Her usual methods of control would cause the spell to fizzle. Direction was a proper way of controlling Pyre Valor's spells. Direction and an instinctive use of the right amount of magic. She aimed her hoofs at the dummy and let go. Twin jets of flame burst from Twilight's hoofs. They traveled only for a short distance, barely licking the dummy. That was enough to light it on fire, sending thick clouds of smoke rising upwards for the other recruits to gawk at. "Impressive," Owlside said as Twilight walked back to her place. "So the first pony to show a spell we can use against the Wolven is some pony not even from here. Even I am embarrassed. Next!" Nervous, Rarity stepped up.
I suppose a spell that gives one a fabulous hairdo won't suffice? She asked.
Owlsight didn't even look up from the notes he was scribbling.
"One more wisecrack, recruit, and I will saw your horn off and chuck you over to infantry," he said. "They are not connoisseurs of erudite witticisms over there like I am."
Twilight looked on worriedly. It wasn't that her friend was a complete failure at magic, but Rarity had always used her spells mostly for dressmaking and gem-finding. She certainly hadn't studied and developed it as Twilight had. There was also the magical drift to consider. She could see the effort show on Rarity's face, who had opted for a telekinetic kick. The target dummy vibrated slightly, shaking a single strand of straw out of the stuffing. Owlsight continued scribbling his notes down as Rarity slinked back to her position with her head down. Some of the recruits looked ready to laugh. One of them went so far as to let out a snigger at the dismal performance. Owlsight immediately raised his head, to the entire group's surprise.
"Do you think that's funny, recruit?" he shouted. "You think it's hilarious finding out that we're even more short-hoofed than anticipated with the woven on the way? Vice-Captain, give that joker his first 5 lashes!"
The vice-captain pulled the horrified stallion out of the line and led him off. The rest of the group was completely stone-faced by the time he was out of sight.
"Let's get on with the magical sustainability test,"
Owlsight said. The second test involved only their telekinesis this time. Several weights were brought out. They were asked to pick one they could lift without struggling, then told to hold it until ordered to stop. Twilight did well with the weight slightly above the average chosen by the other recruits, but the Burning Hoofs spell she had cast had taken more magic than she had anticipated, so she was sweating with effort by the time she was ordered to put it down. Rarity could only lift the lightest weight, but she held it reasonably well before being told to put it down. No pony made a fuss about it this time. For the rest of the day they were drilled in maintaining and moving information and casting spells simultaneously. They were also taught the order by which woven were to be killed, starting from high-ranking ones to the lowest grunts. The sun was setting when they were dismissed, each one of them completely exhausted physically and mentally. Rarity was all but dragging herself towards the building they were staying in while Twilight walked by her side. Owlsight's voice stopped both of them.
"Come over here, recruits,"
Owlsight called. Twilight and Rarity did so. The sight of the pony who had laughed, limping back to his position, had burned a simple rule into their minds. Do not anger Mage Captain Owlsight.
"Yes, sir?"
Rarity asked.
"I don't know what I'm going to do with you, Recruit Rarity,"
Owlsight said.
"You're like a giant water tank with only a pinhole for an opening. Your burst is completely useless, but you have decent sustainability. Normally we'd work on that until we made something out of you, but these aren't normal times. If I put you out there in time for the woven attack, you'll get yourself killed. Worse, you'll probably drag some pony to the grave with you."
Rarity stared at the ground at this. Twilight opened her mouth to protest, but she closed her mouth just as quickly. As disloyal as it seemed not to stand up for her friend, she couldn't find the nerve to go against Mage Captain Owlsight on this.
"What was your profession before signing up?"
Owlsight asked.
I was a dressmaker,"
Rarity said.
"Useful enough profession. I'm going to arrange for you to transfer to Maintenance Division over at Logistics. Use your sewing skill to patch up ripped clothes, leather armor, and tents. Report to Logistics Officer Frostmane tomorrow morning."
"Yes, sir,"
Rarity said. After that, the two unicorns headed back for the day. Applejack tapped the pavement with her hoof as she inspected her new gear. Both she and Pinkie Pie had been given a set of medium barding as soon as they signed up with infantry. Right now she was wearing a heavy suit of chain with thick plates of metal covering most of her face, neck, chest and flanks. It was similar to Scarlet Rabbit's, but with more solid plates. Pegasi had to wear lighter barding to stay aloft. She was expecting some claws to cover her legs like the ones that Vanguard wore. Capricorn, Caprice, whatever that long-tailed word was, and was a little disappointed when she didn't get one. She guessed that only high-ranking officers got to wear them. None of the officers seemed to mind when she wore her hat on top of her headpiece. In addition to the barding, she was also given a set of tramplers, metal shoes that made her legs feel a little stiff.
You could have taken his head off if you were wearing tramplers.
She now understood what Vanguard had meant by those words. These things were heavy and hard. Having one fall on you would hurt quite badly. Having one smashed into you by a strong pony, bones would shatter for sure. The name tramplers was appropriate enough. She almost felt sorry for any wolven caught underneath these. The weight around her body was going to take some getting used to. She expected to wake up stiff in the morning. Applejack knew that, as hard as this suit was for her, it must be worse for Pinkie Pie. As she had feared, she found her friend having trouble just taking a few steps forward. Pinkie had been enthusiastic about getting a set of barding and tramplers. Even though she was a little disappointed that she couldn't choose the color, she was still all smiles when she began putting them on. The weight swiftly crushed that enthusiasm, as surely as it was slowly crushing her.
"That's enough admiring yourselves, fillies,"
one of the infantry officers called out.
"Fall in."
Infantry's recruits made up the largest group of ponies at the plaza at the end of recruitment. They were organized into 3 separate groups with 35 ponies each. The first day of training's objectives was simple: get used to your barding. They were taught basic formations, then made to walk, trot, run and stop, without breaking them. It was only a matter of time before Pinkie collapsed completely while trotting. She was panting and sweating heavily.
"Get up, filly,"
their officer said. He didn't shout like the other officers, but he had a stern tone and a frighteningly uncaring way of talking.
"How can you possibly defeat a wolven if an inanimate suit of metal gets the better of you? Get up!"
Pinkie tried to get to her hoofs, but her knees wouldn't follow through. After a second attempt failed, the officer motioned for Applejack and another recruit to come forward and get her up. They helped her to the side and took off the barding.
"Get back to your positions, you two,"
the officer said. The day finished with Pinkie remaining sidelined. Although completely exhausted herself, Applejack walked over to her. One of the other recruits, a young stallion with a light brown coat and a short, spiky mane of a darker brown named Too Cold, walked with her. He was the other recruit who had been called to help Pinkie earlier, and he was also the pony immediately to Applejack's left while in formation. Earlier, Applejack had asked about his name, to which he replied,
"My parents have no imagination. I was their second colt."
They found Pinkie looking completely deflated when she heard that they were to report back in the next morning.
"Maybe infantry ain't the place for you, Pinkie," Applejack said. "There has to be a group that doesn't need to wear all this metal."
"They'd find a use for her in logistics," Too Cold said.
"Logis what?"
Applejack asked.
"What do they do?"
"Lots of stuff. If it's got something to do with food, equipment, transportation and recruitment, logistics deals with it."
"Well, there you go," Applejack said. "Sounds like something you can do, Pinkie."
The suggestion brightened Pinkie up.
"Yeah,"
she said.
"I'm pretty good with food, especially if they don't make me wear the suit while making it."
"Are you sure?"
Too Cold asked.
"The Legion can't run without logistics, but it's not a glory role. Your brothers and sisters set out to win the day while you hang by near the rear lines peeling potatoes." "It takes all kinds to make the Legion," Applejack said. "You said it yourself."
She looked back at Pinkie.
"Let's get some rest. Let's see if we can talk to your officer to putting you there."
"He's probably considering it already," Too Cold said. The recruits for medical didn't have a place in Bastion City Plaza. They were too few in number and didn't need that large a space anyway. Instead, Fluttershy was ushered into one of the nearby buildings. Inside, Dr. Redbrand and 2 assistants were standing over several recruits. Even at a distance, Fluttershy noticed the scowl on Redbrand's face and the veins pulsing on his forehead. He also noticed her and immediately shouted,
"Fluttershy, about time you showed up! Get your buck-marked flank over here and help out!"
He looked toward the recruits, who were clearly cowed by his yelling.
"These idiots can't even do a proper sling! I've got half a mind to break their forelegs and let them figure it out!"
Fluttershy rushed over out of concern for two things: to make sure that Redbrand didn't shout himself hoarse, and to make sure that he didn't really break the forelegs of his new recruits. Despite being a new recruit herself, she was soon playing more the role of teacher instead of student, helping the other recruits master different medical techniques before Redbrand lost his patience. The doctor meant well, and he taught clearly and precisely. He also expected great results and resorted to violent threats when his students fumbled. Nevertheless, Fluttershy felt that he would only remotely consider carrying out those threats when things got very bad indeed. She remembered Angel. The rabbit was also often grumpy, but he always meant well. The thought saddened her. How was Angel doing now? Was he still living in her home? Had he moved on? Perhaps he had started living with another pony. She wasn't quite sure how to feel about that. She also wondered if he resented her for disappearing, or if he was now glad he didn't have to fuss over some pony.
"Stop staring into space and help that recruit over there, Fluttershy," Redbrand growled. "He's about to strangle himself with that roll of bandages."
Fluttershy flew over to the poor recruit and helped him untangle himself. She smiled a little. The thought of comparing little Angel to the tall and gruff Redbrand did seem kind of silly. She decided to concentrate on helping out for the sake of the recruits. It didn't take long for the day to wear down. With the recruits all heading out for the day, Fluttershy decided to stay a little longer to help clean up.
"Fluttershy,"
Redbrand said gruffly. She turned towards him in response.
"Good job for today."
He opened the flask he seemed to carry with him at all times and took a short pull.
"Here, welcome to medical."
He offered the flask to her. She took it gingerly and sniffed at its contents. Whatever was inside smelled quite strongly. She looked at Redbrand, who was waiting patiently, and decided that refusing would be rude. She took a quick sip, then gagged. The liquid inside was incredibly strong. It ran down her throat like liquid fire after she forced herself to swallow. Coughing, she handed the flask back to Redbrand.
"Filly?"
His tone took on a mock scorn. He put the flask's cap back on and put it away.
"See you in the morning, Fluttershy."
Still choking and her head spinning slightly, Fluttershy did her best to nod and smile before heading back to the building she was staying in. While the other pony recruits trained on the plaza, the Pegasi of Reconnaissance trained high above it. Up in the air, Rainbow Dash tried out the new leather suit she had been provided. Flying with the added weight was certainly a new experience. She had flown while carrying heavy objects before, even other ponies, but having the weight distributed all around her was different. It had actually taken her a few minutes of adjusting to make sure that the new barding didn't chafe around her wings. In addition to her new barding, Rainbow had also been provided with a few more things: a map of the Barrier Lands in general, a map of the Northern Barrier Land, and one of Bastion City and its surrounding areas.
"Familiarize yourself with these areas, Chosen,"
the reconnaissance officer had told her.
"The rest of your fellows know them by heart for having lived here, but you don't. You're excused from target practice today so you can explore before the Woven arrive."
Then there was a crossbow. Rainbow held the weapon as if she were holding a sleeping snake. She had never held a weapon before, except for Vanguard's two-bladed sword. This was certainly the first time she would actually own one. In addition to the crossbow, she also had a case of bolts strapped to her left side. She took aim, bringing the sight to her eye, like the officer had shown her, and scanned her surroundings. She imagined a Woven lurking down below, stalking one of her friends with its cruel fangs bared and ready to kill. She would swoop in the nick of time, take aim and fire in a split second. Just as the Woven would jump in for the kill, the bolt would catch it right between the ribs and plunge into a lung. The force of the impact would knock it to the ground, where it would lay feebly on its side while wheezing and gurgling its life away. Rainbow Dash shook her head, cursing her ridiculously vivid imagination, and for reminding herself of what she would have to do. "I had to shoot," she argued mentally. To herself she realized in dismay. This was hardly any better than arguing with a pile of rocks with a birthday hat. "It was going after my friend."
Nice, some pony from behind her said. They gave you a Quarrel Mark II light crossbow. Enjoy the feel of it?
Rainbow turned towards the voice.
Aren't you supposed to be on duty or something, Scarlet? She asked. I am on duty, Scarlet Rabbit replied with a grin. Special operations, remember? Standing around doing nothing is not the weirdest thing we've had to do. Sounds like an easy job. Only if you make the cut. Shouldn't you be at the firing range? I was told to explore some of these places.
Rainbow pointed to her maps.
I was just about to go. I'll come along. Gotta make sure you don't get lost.
Rainbow's eyes narrowed as she observed Scarlet. She hadn't forgotten what Vanguard Clash had said just this morning. Almost as fast as Scarlet. Vanguard wasn't an idiot. He certainly wasn't blind either. He knew what he was saying and who he was saying it in front of. Almost. That was a bald-faced challenge, and Rainbow Dash certainly wasn't going to take it lying down.
All right, how about we go to this place?
She suggested. She pointed at her map of Bastion City's surroundings.
Frost Rock Needle?
Scarlet asked. Rainbow had already heard some information about that spot from the other recruits. The Needle, as it was often simply called, was a peculiar formation of rocks a couple of miles to the north of Bastion City that resembled a needle jutting upwards. The story went that the needle rose up when Prince Terrado stomped his hoofs on the ground to stab King Fenrir from beneath.
Good choice,
Scarlet said.
Check out the northern areas first, since that's where the Wolven will be coming from. How about we race there?
Rainbow asked.
Or there,
Scarlet replied.
Why race? Why not? I heard you're fast. You heard right, but the captain doesn't like me racing. He says it's bad for morale. And why's that? Well, the ponies I beat tend to think they're slow when I leave them behind. I even drove one to drink. Next time I knew she was getting 20 lashes for showing up for duty while drunk. You're making me want to race you even more. Oh, all right, Scarlet said. Just promise me you won't start crying if you lose. Oh, you'll be the one crying once I leave you behind, Rainbow said. Let's start.
From where they were hovering, they could already see the silhouette of Frost Rock Needle. Scarlet showed Rainbow how to attach the crossbow to her harness, then hovered next to her. He readied himself for a quick flying start.
All right, on 3, he said. 1, 2, 3!
The two of them sped off at the same time, leaving behind twin trails, one of prismatic colors and the other of bright red. To her surprise, Rainbow found herself neck and neck against Scarlet.
He's fast,
she thought. She was flapping her wings as hard as she could, yet the distance between the two of them didn't change. On his part, Scarlet wasn't even looking at her. As the needle came closer, Rainbow began to feel the burn of exertion in her wings. She grit her teeth and flapped even harder. The onrushing wind began to send her lips flapping. Scarlet remained at her side, his face split into a wide grin. He was enjoying this. She was straining herself just to lose him, and he looked like he was having the time of his life. The needle was a mile away when Rainbow gave it everything she got in one final burst. Finally, she noticed herself pulling slightly away from Scarlet. She looked ahead in time to realize that she had to slow down or slam into the rocks. With her wings flapping backward, Rainbow forced herself to decelerate, her hoofs flailing wildly in her attempt. She slowed down enough to strike the rocks with her hoofs without shattering her legs. She looked to her side in time to see Scarlet touch the rocks just a split second after her.
Ha!
She cried out between pants.
I won! I beat you!
Scarlet Rabbit was panting too.
Yeah, you did, he said with a grin. I can't believe some pony could actually beat me.
Rainbow did a little victory dance in the air. She did it. She showed that Vanguard and his mother. Her wings were on fire, and she was panting as if air was going to go out of style after a few minutes, but she did it. Scarlet flew over and offered a hoof in congratulations. With a smirk, she took it and shook vigorously. The motion caused Scarlet's barding to jingle slightly. The sound immediately wiped the smirk off Rainbow's face.
Hey, Scarlet, how heavy is that barding you're wearing?
She asked.
Oh, this?
Scarlet asked.
It's called light barding, so it's light. Let me try it on. I'm not switching bodies with you out here, Scarlet protested.
Rainbow hovered up close and lifted up the metal plate that protected Scarlet's chest. Like her tail, the plate alone likely weighed half as much as her leathers. Scarlet just raised her, wearing a plate-reinforced suit of chain barding.
"Who told you to turn this into some handicap match?" she asked. "What are you talking about?" Scarlet asked. "Did you think I was going to take off my barding and leave it somewhere while we raced?" "Well, yeah."
Scarlet laughed briefly.
"That's crazy," he said. "This thing costs a lot, you know. I'll leave it somewhere for a few minutes and I'll end up flying naked for the rest of my missions." "This race doesn't count," Rainbow said through grit teeth. "Someday we'll race on even terms." Okay, Scarlet said with his hoofs raised in front of him. "We'll race some other time and—" He stopped and stared at what was behind Rainbow. Curious, she looked towards that direction as well. "Time to head back," he said. To the north, just at the edge of the horizon, they could already see a steadily advancing mass of dark colors. The Woven were on the move once more. Even Rainbow could tell that they would be by the city's gates soon. Ignoring the burning in her wings, she followed Scarlet back to the city.